the end of the session. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Sabrina Greupner. When we heard we were going to be having the Student Success Conference at the Ontario Science Centre, and experiential learning, project-based learning, kind of is the theme of what you're hearing in Ron Berger's keynote today. We thought, well, if we're going to get the Science Centre, how can we not invite somebody from the Weston Innovation Centre? If any of you have young children, or if you've been here with your classes and have gone through the Weston Innovation Centre, you know that they make learning visible, hands-on, interactive. And so that permeates a lot of the themes that we're hearing today. And so when we met to talk about the Student Success Conference, we said, you know, we really need to invite somebody here. And so luckily, Patrick Keyes put me in contact with Sabrina. And Sabrina is the manager of the Weston Innovation Centre and also part of the Cisco Fellowship. And so she met with me and we spoke about how do we look at inquiry-based learning and the opportunity that the Science Centre presents us. And so without wasting any more time, I'd like to turn it over and introduce Sabrina.
Thank you, Sandra. Great. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the Ontario Science Centre, I'd like to welcome all of you here. We're so glad to have you. The inquiry-based learning process is something we have very dear to our hearts, and the process, as I'm sure you know, works a lot better when you work collaboratively, and we're definitely interested in combining informal education learning like we have here in the Science Centre with the formal education that you provide in the school system. Today I'm going to be talking about digital technology, how it can work in an inquiry-based system, especially in an informal-based, learning-based environment like here at the Science Centre. Before I start, though, how many of you are actually have a background or currently teaching a science subject? So about half of you. Okay, have no fear. I know I'm talking about science for a lot of this, but that's not a prerequisite to enjoying or appreciating this presentation. But I obviously do have a bit of a science bent, but I definitely want to look at how things you do in the classroom can kind of match up with things you can do here at the Science Centre, and how that process can be made a little bit easier with digital technology. So just to get started here, I want to start with a little clip. I don't know, any of you here fans of the Jon Stewart show? Okay, you might recognize every person being interviewed here. If you don't worry, I'll explain it in a sec. This is someone from Bloomberg News interviewing a congressman on the right. Let's hear what they have to say about climate change.
There's a big report from the UN today, somewhere over 800 scientists saying that climate change, I'll read the quote from, is severe, pervasive, and irreversible. What's your take on that?
Well, this is nothing new. They always make these kind of predictions, and obviously there are some people that want to use environmental regulations to try to control the economy or trying to control private property. But if you look at their predictions in the past 5 or 10 or 15 years, most of the predictions have been wrong. And anybody who's going to predict what's going to happen in the year 2100, 85 years from now, is not going to be correct. And so I just unfortunately think
it's science. It's 800 scientists. It's not some random guy making a prediction.
There are a lot of other scientists who disagree. For example, we've now had close to 18 years of no global warming, and even though carbon dioxide emissions have increased 25% over the last 18 years, nobody can explain that. So let's go to the science. Let's go to the science and not just make these kind of predictions as to what's going to happen 86 years from now. The only thing you know for sure about predictions that far away is that they're not going to be true. And there's still no explanation, and no one can tell me yet what percentage of so-called climate change is due to human activity, what percentage is due to natural trends, natural cycles, what percentage is due to sunspots. A lot of people think that that has an impact as well. We don't know enough yet to make decisions that are going to hurt our economy or hurt the American people. So let's continue to gather the facts, make sure the science is correct. Don't get into these predictions what's going to happen 86 years from now, because we know that's not going to be true. But there's a lot more.
Okay, so there's a little interview that took place a few months ago on Bloomberg News. Anybody recognize this person right here? He's kind of big to us in the museum field. His name's Lamar Smith. He's the Republican congressman from Texas. He's also the chair of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, which has jurisdiction over NASA, the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, NOAA, and most other scientific, including the NSF, which is the National Science Foundation in the U.S., which controls funding to many of the museums that my colleagues work in. So this gentleman is now effectively the head of the committee that controls funding and budgeting and permissions for science studies in those organizations. I'm not going to get into a debate about his take on climate change or whatever, but what it does illustrate is that there is currently, there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of information in the media, and all of you, and I'm not just talking to the science teachers, all of you are on the front lines when it comes to creating the next generation of scientifically literate students who are going to be members of society, who have the ability to cut through the noise and actually ask questions, be skeptical, make choices, and evaluate the evidence that's out there. Just so we don't get, too smug about these things up here in Canada, we run into some of the same issues here. If you looked at National Geographic's cover last month, which was the war on science, it talks about the fact that one of the issues in the media right now that's plaguing everyone with this is false equivalency, the idea that you have to always present the opposing side, whether or not it's scientifically accurate, in order to present this sort of the Fox News fair and balanced approach to things. So you definitely end up with people, and I'm not just talking students, but everybody in society being flooded with information of all different kinds, specifically related to science. And then you have to try and figure out how are they going to be able to vet that. Well, one of the best ways of doing that, obviously, is through inquiry-based learning. Because of the fact that at its very core, it's about asking questions, about being skeptical, about going in and looking for evidence and researching and finding answers, and then sharing that information with other people. This is one of my favorites. I tried the trick with the tea bags. It did not correct my vision. So one of the things I also like to point out is if you ever happen to stumble across Viral Nova or BuzzFeed or whatever, you're going to run into this kind of fun science too. Again, you'd be surprised where the inquiry sort of aspect of learning comes into the fore. You have to really think to yourself, okay, now what exactly are they basing this on? Haven't tried the coconut oil though, sorry. Okay, so science literacy. One of the things we hold very dear here at the Science Centre is the position or the role we play in society in terms of making sure we're creating literate, educated citizens who have the ability, as I said, to go out and be skeptical and ask questions and interest themselves in these issues. That goes hand in hand with what's happening in the school system. How science studies in schools and inquiry-based learning can help people to actually make the link between the pure research and what's actually happening out there in the world, and how you can bridge that gap. As Carl Sagan said right here, for the most part, I'm not saying everybody's like this, but for the most part, we live in a society dependent on science and technology in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology. And it's becoming more and more so, especially when you think about the fact that whereas maybe 30 years ago, you had to know a little bit about how a computer worked to get it to work. Now it's very much about it's become so easy to use the tools, people don't really understand the guts underneath them and how they work. So we're going to take a little look at how you can foster an inquiring mind, both within the formal and the informal learning process. First of all, a little bit of background. As Sandra mentioned earlier, I manage the Weston Family Innovation Centre. This was a project, how many of you have had a chance to actually go down and play yet? Oh, only a few. Take the time today if you have the chance. It's a great spot. I manage the Weston Family Innovation Centre proper, which is the large room, which is entirely inquiry-based. So lots of hands-on activities. There's area, on the top right there, you look at how kids can compare materials. So they slide objects down a ramp and you look at things like friction, mass, the types of materials and material science are inventing. We just did a presentation this last week. A team of mine did something on a new 3M product. It feels like very smooth, like very, very fine sandpaper, but it's got the most slip resistance of any material they've developed yet. So you can put on the bottom of shoes and it doesn't even slip on ice. So they loaned us a boot, where basically we're showing the kids that with some of the new material science out there, you can really affect how people in their everyday lives are affected by the technology. The bottom area is an area where kids can make shoes. So it sounds like sort of a crafty thing, but the idea is that we want them to look at different materials and how they work in different situations. And shoes are something we found teens especially are very interested in for some reason. So they made all kinds of different ones, and there are pillars in the background. This was started in 2004 thanks to a grant from the government, the Ontario government, and the Garfield Weston Foundation. So it was a $40 million project in which we added new experience areas to the Science Centre. They were entirely based on the model of inquiry-based learning. So we had professionals from your field, educators coming in, we had consultants, we had scientists working on exhibits, developing exhibits that were driven at their core by the inquiry-based learning model. The other space I manage is related to the WIFIC Center, the Weston Family Innovation Centre. If I call it WIFIC, that's an internal term. Sorry, it's a stupid acronym. The hot zone is right adjacent to it. It's a space we use for current science. In other words, our staff prepare presentations on current stories in the news about science, about issues related to science. We have editorial English and French, we have graphic designers, we have animators, and we have science researchers. And then they create the information, it goes into a content management system that we run here in the building. And then it's delivered on that platform on large screens for the public, and we present them about 3 or 4 times a day. And the information is switched out every week, so that when you go into the space, you're getting current science. And the reason I mention these specifically to all of you is that it'll become apparent later because I'm going to ask you for some help with this area. The folks on the right there, I can barely see them, the photo's really dark. I believe Patrick Keyes was involved in this one, standing over there in the corner. That was when we had the Climate Change Exchange. It was run by the British Council, and it was a sort of a colloquium. We had students from Toronto, up north in Iqaluit. We had folks in Moscow, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and they were all connected by virtual networks in order to converse with each other, teenagers, about the issue of climate change. And so we hold these type of sort of groups activities in that space as well. Let's see. This is the challenge zone, which is on the other side of the Weston Family Innovation Centre. It's the space where we hold most of our school programs, and they're, for the most part, all inquiry-based learning. We have DNA labs, we have robotics, we do stuff with water testing, bacteria, so on. So the idea was that we'd have a big open space. The #1 criterion for that space was that you could make a mess. So the floors, you can drop water, there's drains, there's doors that open, there's all kinds of stuff in there. And this is one of my favorite spaces. I have a team who looks after what's called the Idea Gallery. And it's a space where we get young artists, high school, college, sort of emerging artists, to pair up with scientists and put on gallery displays. So for example, we have the Stem Cell Research Society and the Canadian Stem Cell Research Society were holding a conference in Toronto. They matched their scientists up with some high school and college students from OCAD. At the time, I think it was still college. No, it's university already. And what they did was they did textile designs, fabric designs, based on microscopy images of stem cells. And then the fabric was used to do fashion design from Ryerson's group, and they did a fashion show wearing all the different fabrics. So the gallery is a space where we welcome any of you who have students, for example, who do art that you can apply and then be matched up with a scientific group to do some sort of display in the space. It is, we want to explore sort of the membrane, the space between where science and art meet, and how that can help better communicate science if people see the art. All right, so all this was wonderful. It was a lot of money. And we went on this little adventure in 2004, 2005, which is when I came on board as manager of that space. And as you always should do, and I know you all do it, you have to do some evaluation at some point. So we had outside evaluators come in, we had internal evaluation. And we encountered some things that I suspect if you've done inquiry-based learning in your classrooms, you've run into as well. So what worked and what didn't. Number 1, inquiry-based learning really only works well with awesome, excellent, motivated facilitators. And that means all of you, okay? Without a teacher or a leader, a facilitator at the core, it's a process that's very difficult to run in a space. We found that our first run at that space, there were a lot of hands-on, open-ended exhibits, very much built on the constructivist learning model where you assumed people were coming with a certain base of knowledge and could just build on that. The result was that a lot of adults stood there totally bewildered and didn't know what to do with themselves. A lot of the kids were right into it, but when we evaluated, we found they weren't really learning as much as we'd hoped. So the result was we had to pay a lot of money for staffing, so we had to have a lot of staff on the floor, which was fine. We kind of figured that to begin with. And then B, we ended up having to rethink how the science was communicated. So it was one thing to have open-ended, inquiry-based learning spaces, but because it wasn't a formal setting like a classroom, you couldn't count on necessarily a teacher or a facilitator being there to explain the science all the time, especially on a busy day when we get 8,000 people in the building, right? So we ended up actually, about 3 years ago, spending a lot of money to redo the exhibits. And we ended up scaffolding the information. So there were more panels, there were digital files you could download with QR codes, there were videos you could watch which would kind of explain the context behind the phenomenon or the thing you were looking at and made it a lot clearer. And we found after evaluating that the learning was a lot more effective. So I think that, I'm guessing that kind of mirrors what happens in the classroom too. You have to have someone there who's going to push the kids to ask the right questions, not just any question, and make sure that they're heading in the right direction, so to speak. This last photo is what the space looks like at the end of the day in the area where we ask them to build different kinds of models to see how aerodynamic they are. They go up those air tubes, those tubes right there. I'm a wee bit on the OCD side, so when I first started managing the space, the part about inquiry-based learning that really drove me nuts was the fact that it's very, very messy. It can be very, very messy. I taught for 15 years for York Region, and if I'd had this going on in my class every day, I probably would have lost my mind. So the question is, how do you adapt to that model? Things do get messy. Kids do have to get hands-on, that type of thing. So, and we just learned to live with it. We get the crew in at the end of the day, they clean everything up, and then the next day it's all the same thing again. So, because learning can be a lot of fun, but it can be messy, something you have to come to terms with. So here's an example of how some of the stuff I talked about in terms of scaffolding additional information. We came up with adjunct exhibits that actually had more traditional panel copy, interactives. You know, how did that giant sculpture, that blue sculpture in the background that had sensors in it which respond to your heartbeat, how did that actually tie in with the science of how the heart works, you know, and the organ systems in the curriculum and things like that. So we came up with additional panels, additional exhibits, so to speak. And we came away with 3 basic learnings. So one, kids and adults love inquiry-based learning when it's fun. And it can be fun. In the top left there, we have an installation by a Toronto company called Gesture Tech. They install infrared sensors in the ceiling, which react to body heat, which then cause projection on the floor to move. So we have a version where you can kick a virtual soccer ball around, or in this case, there's goldfish that scurry all over the floor that they'll scurry out of your way when you're walking and so on. And then you can watch the 2-year-olds swim. I watch them get down on their stomachs and swim across the concrete floor, which makes their parents really happy on laundry day. And you get lots of sort of hands-on, body-on fun there. The other thing, of course, we learned is that kids love to share what they've done. So we learned very quickly we had to put up pedestals with boxes and display spaces, especially in the make a shoe area and so on, so they can show off what they've done with their name on it and share what they've done with other people. It's part sort of look what I did and maybe let other people be inspired what I did as well, from what I did. Also, and the number one thing, they're super, super keen on stuff that's all about them. We all are, right? So if you go to an exhibit, it's all about me, that's wonderful, okay? So we have an exhibit where you can see what you look like in 50 years. So you have your picture taken, it ages you with the software. They would line up for that for half an hour to get to that exhibit. It's all about you. So therefore, Inquiry-based learning is a lot more interesting when it's relevant, when it really, really makes sense. Yeah, I don't like that exhibit a whole lot. I don't go near it anymore. All right. Now, one other really important thing happened since 2004, which we've had to come to terms with gradually. So this actually gets to the topic of, believe it or not, my presentation. I'll do a little quiz with you here. How many text messages does the average North American teen send every month? I'll give you a second to choose. Ready? Ready? Somebody already knows the answer, I'm sure. The actual answer is 4,000. I'm not making that up. I'm all about the data. That works out to about 10 per hour on average. So, Nielsen study, that was actually 2010, 5 years ago. So the Nielsen study polled 30,000 teenagers through an AT&T interview. They checked their phone records after permissions were granted, and 30,000 teenagers averaged 4,030 texts per month. 10 per hour, many, many per day. Okay. So what does that mean? I'm assuming most of your kids, you don't allow them in the classroom. Sometimes you do. I don't know. It depends on everybody I've talked to has different policies. But what we've learned in the museum environment is we're getting an awful lot of this all the time. The thumbs are going constantly as kids are wandering through the exhibit halls. So the question is, what do you do about that? You can't say, well, at least in an informal learning environment, you can't say really put that away. That doesn't work that way. Do we really want them to put it away? How can we work with the technology that didn't exist 6, 7 years ago and actually try and incorporate that into the inquiry-based learning process? So we've been trying lots of things. I'm not saying we're experts at it, and by no means have we exhausted all the possibilities yet, but I thought what I could do today is look at some of the stuff that we've tried. This is, I'm sure you've seen this before, the whole inquiry-based learning wheel. Basically, breaking down the process into exploring, investigating, processing, and creating. We do the same thing basically. I don't know if you're aware, but we have a huge fabrication facility at the bottom of the valley, and we build all our own exhibits. So we have designers, we have CAD people, we have researchers who do the research first, we have woodworkers, iron workers, welders, we have electricians, we've got everybody on staff. So what they do is they take the designs and they build the exhibits. And it's all part of a process that's almost identical to this. We start with a team that picks the topic. Okay, we're going to do a new exhibit on respiration. How do your lungs work? How does all that work? We're going to ask ourselves some questions. What do we want to know? What would visitors want to know? How would they want to learn about it? We come up with those questions, then we get the designers involved, there's a project plan, and then all of a sudden you start doing your research, you evaluate what's relevant and what's not, and then the fun part, at least for me, is at the end when you do the creative thing and you share all that in some form. Now that's not to say the other parts aren't creative, they're very creative, it's just the part at the end is really what I wanted to focus on today. The part where in the inquiry-based learning process you can actually synthesize that information and then pass it on and share it to other people. That's really, I find, key right now, especially to young people, especially to teenagers. With social media, this idea that I can share information in the process, let people know what I know, is very, very key. And if you can plug into that aspect of it during the inquiry-based process, it really gets them motivated to follow through the entire cycle. There's lots of words that fall into this section. Create, share, present, communicate, report, demonstrate, debate, express, whatever. It's all about how do you communicate what you've learned, and in the process, solidify that information for yourself and make sure that you're actually creating some sort of change, becoming an agent of change. I'm just going to play this video very quickly. When you're downstairs, if you have time today, the Weston Family Innovation Centre is one huge space that I just showed you some pictures of. But we also just recently opened up another exhibit hall called The Human Edge. And it's dedicated to the limits of the human experience, whether they be psychological, physical, whatever. So there's lots of exhibits there. I'll just show you a quick overview video. No, I won't. Yes, I will. Hang on. Oops, we need the play button.
the AstraZeneca Human Edge, a brand new exhibition here at the Ontario Science Centre where we explore the limits, the boundaries of what it means to be human.
I'm just going to hit mute there for a second. So there's a big climbing wall when you come in on the left. There's exhibits related to pregnancy, gestation, GMOs, so genetically modified organisms, and we've got some glow-in-the-dark zebrafish for you to check out. There's sports areas, including dance. The climbing wall you can't get at because you'll be bitten by a 5-year-old, I guarantee you. There's a dance floor that when you dance on it, it uses piezoelectric to generate electricity. So lots of stuff as well on biology. Some things there, you know, the slice look through on the human body, so we've got that kind of stuff there as well. The idea is that it was exploring the limits of human experience. We wanted to hit on topics that combined that sort of sense of, you know, being in the lab, the field research, with what that generally means to the public. Like, why should they care about glow-in-the-dark zebrafish? Okay, what does that, you know, tell you might be happening in the next 10 to 20 years and so on. So we tried to hit on, when we were brainstorming, things about, you know, risk-taking for some of the psychological and psychiatric sections of the exhibits, you know, like what drives some people to take enormous risks, why will others not do that? Extreme sports, material science, concussion and sports injuries, things like that. Because we found that with teens, unless you lock them into some bigger issue, some bigger world problem, it becomes a little too abstract. It has to be more concrete. So I thought I'd give a little sample of something we've been playing with. Our question was, if you bring a class here and you're doing inquiry-based learning, let's say you're studying the brain, just off the top of my head, the brain in the classroom. And you come here, and one of the goals is to get kids to explore some of the issue related to the brain more closely, but then to synthesize that information into something that they can share with their friends or people through social media. So I ran through this exercise myself. This is the concussion area, which is related to hockey down in the area. And we talk about equipment, new technology, new materials, and sports equipment. But there's also, of course, the one issue that everyone is still having to come to grips with, and that's the potential, not necessarily intentional, but accidental violence of hockey. So right here we have an exhibit set up where you can press a button, input various parameters as to speed and strength. There's a Reebok, it's one of our sponsors. They provided us with some helmets. And the idea is, I think I've got a video for you here. Boom. Okay, so you can see what an average hit would look like if it went straight to the head. You can try it from front, from the side, and so on, in order to look at concussions. I can play that for you again with the volume on. It's much more dramatic. There we go. Okay, and I'm trying to illustrate to folks why it's important you wear a helmet, because of the fact that, well, we had some recent research showing that in Canada, between the ages of 13 to 19, not quite 50% of all traumatic head injuries are caused by hockey. So kids with concussions are generally hockey players for the most part, followed closely by, believe it or not, soccer, and then after that, bicycle riding. So those three sports are what they're seeing the most often at hospitals downtown, and we wanted to make it clear to kids why this was an issue. Soccer, it turns out the biggest thing isn't other soccer players, it's running into the goalposts. So that's where they brain themselves, yeah. All right, so we've got some exhibits then on how a child's skull differs from an adult skull in terms of bone density and the plate thickness. We've got some exhibits on where the axons get torn. So when you have a concussion, basically your brain sloshes around inside your skull. It bangs first on one side, it bangs on the other side, and in the process, the gray and white matter travel at different speeds and pull themselves apart within your brain. So the gray matter is denser than the white matter. So you end up with the axons being torn, And that ends up with all kinds of symptoms: headaches, memory loss, recurrent pain, vision problems, and so on. So we kind of illustrate that through some of our panels. We went out and interviewed folks with concussions. And so we collected their helmets, and we had a construction worker who fell off the scaffolding. We have a bicycle, I don't know if you can see there, but the helmet took the brunt of it and split in half right through the top when he fell off his bicycle at high speed. And then the bottom is a motorcyclist, and that's the scarring here. The top layer of the helmet got stripped off when he hit the ground. So, you know, they tell in their first-person voice what it was like to have a head injury of that kind. And then we have sort of the virtual surgery area where you can look at what parts get replaced how and how doctors fix things, you know, that type of thing. And then we have our staff who are there, and they bring props and they explain how things work and what happened to your brain. And that's when, as educators, we would want the kids to take control of the process. So in other words, what I've just shown you, all those exhibits, all those panels and all that kind of thing, we want people to use them as resources. How can you get your kids to say, take the technology that's in your hand, your cell phone, your smartphone, or whatever, take some pictures, make some notes, add it to what you've done in the classroom, and then publish your findings in a way that can be easily shared in social media. One of the apps, I've been playing with a bunch of apps with my team members, and I'm guessing you've all probably tried most of these already, but for those of you who haven't, give them a try if you want. One of my favorites at the moment is Adobe Slate. Has anyone here tried Slate yet? No? Let me see if, speaking of fancy technology, this could be tricky. Woohoo! There we go. Okay. So, Adobe Slate. These are all forms of, I have a handout by the way. These are all forms of software apps. I tried to find as many as I could for you that are good on both platforms. It doesn't have to be Apple, it can be on Android as well. These are programs that facilitate synthesizing information. So if the kids have collected their data, they've done their research, they've taken lots of photos with their phone of various exhibits, they've copied the info from the panels, these things make it really, really easy for them to share their findings. So for example, on Slate, so I just basically, because when my colleagues wrote the copy, I shamelessly ripped it off. Okay? So I didn't actually rewrite any of this copy. So I took it straight off the exhibit panels. But basically, Slate allows you to go through and assemble your data and your photos, and it's all drag and drop. Like seriously, I learned how to use this in 5 minutes. It's not difficult at all. And you can combine the images. You get this very slick looking effect, which I don't need my tablet for. Okay. And you can take the content and assemble it. So you're asking yourselves, well, how's that really different from a PowerPoint or whatever? I mean, one of the things is ease of use. So I've decided, I want Crosby instead. That makes for a much better image. Okay, especially with bloody nose. There we go. Okay, so now I've got Crosby in there, which makes for, so basically you have your images collected, you can transfer them from your smartphone to your tablet using Dropbox or some other method that you prefer, and then you assemble it very quickly. The beauty of this particular type of software is that they've made it A, really easy to use, and B, the big problem for most people, if any of you have ever been in web design or anything like that, is platform and device compatibility. So when you publish, hit the publish button on this, you can share it to any of the social media and it automatically resizes and reformats it so it looks wonderful on a phone or on a desktop or on your tablet or whatever. So it's got a fluid layout system so that when you look at it on Facebook, it actually scrolls really beautifully inside your phone and you don't have to worry about, did I code it so that the cells spread properly, the whole thing. I used to do old school HTML and that drove us all crazy, right? So, I'm going to show you Storehouse. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but this is very passive. In other words, pictures and text for the most part. Do you have a question?
Yeah, does it help cite where to get pictures from and stuff like that?
You absolutely, I don't know if you noticed, but it might not be on the screen, it's not good, but there's a little caption and citing. Now, you mean automatically cite?
Yeah, could it help with the students?
Yeah, it does have a function for digital citing, where you can automatically add to the source article.
Great.
I didn't stick it in here because I was stealing my own stuff, but yeah. But it does have and it comes up as a large button that for each image you can, and for the text, you can do the sourcing automatically.
Is it sourcing or is it specific citing like APA format?
No, it's just linking. Yeah, you can use other types of software. I know there's other apps which will help you generate your sourcing that way and then input them that way, probably through a bit.ly link or something like that. This particular one, as I said, lots of pictures, lots of text. If you're looking for something that's a little more this one, hockey, the most dangerous game. Again, this is like 5 minutes, so ignore the typos, okay? But basically, Storehouse is a similar type of software app. It also takes text and pictures, but it's a little bit more advanced in that it also takes video, audio, all that kind of stuff. Storehouse, has anyone here used that before? Storehouse will do the same thing. It will automatically on the fly reformat your files, allow you to post them immediately to Facebook. So say your class had a Facebook page related to climate change, they could post their various stories that way very easily. The only advantage is it doesn't look quite as slick as the Adobe stuff. You don't get that fluid kind of thing. But you do get the use of video in the story, and it has some more robust actual sourcing functions in it. Okay. Better hurry. Okay. Sorry, had a lot of stuff today. Canva. Does anyone here use Canva? C-A-N-V-A? Okay. If you're in a hurry and you want to create graphics for social media, Canva is an awesome little tool. On Canva, you can create using templates. That's true, by the way. I only learned that the other day with the California drought going on. Unbelievable. Not to mention that they're draining aquifer water supplies in order to grow almond trees in the desert. Yeah, so that's the way it works at the moment. Canva allows you to take templates, so you can get the students to do graphics that can either be printed out as posters, as little tags, or as Facebook graphics, and talk to them about starting a social justice campaign or a social awareness campaign. Communicating isn't always about, an essay or some sort of slideshow. It can also be about raising awareness, just giving people out in the public facts about science they hadn't maybe thought of before. So it may be that you might not want to eat almonds anymore. I love almonds. Probably still eat them. I want to think a little bit about where they come from, but anyway. So we looked at that already. And this brings me to the point I wanted to get to before I leave you today. I have lots of other examples of apps on the handout, so fear not, there's more of that. But there's one thing I wanted to invite all of you to do. We do have, as I mentioned earlier, the Hot Zone, which is a large space at the bottom of the building that we dedicate to current science. We have projectors, we have screens, and what we like to do on there is feature digital media pieces that communicate science to the general public. And we're always looking for partners who are willing to do this, and we especially like stuff from students. So where they've actually taken their learning and communicated it in an interesting way. I know I was trolling online, I found Chaminade has got a showcase coming up in the end of May, for example, with digital media as well. And we worked with lots of high schools before. The idea is that you want to be able to share what you've learned, but also make the general public aware of that. And as I'm sure you know, when it comes to media of that type, there's basically some rules. It has to be very short, generally less than like a minute to a minute and a half. It has to be sound scientifically, so we need to know the research has been done, and we need to have it entertaining in a way that, basically people are going to want to sit and watch for a minute and a half. But we certainly invite you to get in touch with me if you have stuff like that so that we can show it in our space. And it doesn't, as I said, have to be just from science teachers. You may decide to do this in one of your communications classes or English courses or something like that, or work with one of the science teachers to do that. Yes, collaborate with one of them. And the other thing I wanted to mention to all of you is we also have the Weston Youth Innovation Award, which I administer for the Garfield Weston Foundation every year. We just picked this year's winner yesterday. Last year's winner was right here, Ann Makasinski. And I don't know if you heard of her, but she, student from Victoria, 17 years old, and she came up with a flashlight that doesn't require anything but body heat. So I've got it right here. She sent me one if you want to play with it after, okay? Basically, she was in an inquiry-based learning project in her school and decided to see if she could come up with something for relatives of hers in the Philippines who couldn't study at night because a lot of the families there couldn't pay for the electricity in the evening, or there wasn't electricity due to power outs. So the result was she was like, how can I come up with a flashlight that doesn't need batteries or anything like that? And she decided to take advantage of Peltier tiles, which basically work with the heat differential between your hand and the ambient temperature. And I've been playing with this so much, I'm not sure if it's working right now. Oh yes, I've got sweaty hands. I don't know if you can see the light, but anyway, she built that in her basement. She won the award. She was on Jimmy Fallon. He was very excited. So she was last year's winner, and she came here and she presented to a whole bunch of high school kids, and they were enthralled. It's all about sharing cool stuff. And one of the ways we help sharing the cool stuff is then one of the award prizes is we make a science communication piece for Students could easily put something like that together. We did it in Flash, but there's some of the apps I just showed you can actually assemble graphics. We just took some still photos of Anne making different facial expressions and then added the graphics around the edges. And it comes in about 1.5 minutes. enough, so it's a little long for a piece, but that's kind of what we're looking for. So if you have anything like that that you're doing with your students, we'd really love to actually see some of that, and my contact information is actually on, just skip through because we're short on time here. My contact information is on the handout, which if you want to save a tree, you can download, which live links on a Word doc from the bit.ly link, or I have some printouts up here if you just want to grab a printout on the way out. But we also, as I said, we have the idea gallery. If you're an art teacher, you want to look at something related to science, or if you have some communications pieces that might work well, we're always happy to see those. And as I said, we're all about trying to make the whole process work between the formal and the informal system. So thank you very much. I appreciate you being here today. And if you have any questions, come on up.
Teachers of TCDSU, we really want to thank you for your journey through the Weston Innovation Centre and truly showing us how inquiry happens, not just with the exhibits, but the way that you guys put together your exhibits, come up with questions, statements, and cycles, but also sharing some really wonderful opportunities for our students to have partnerships with the Ontario Science Centre. We greatly appreciate the knowledge, the experience you bring to us, and inspiring us to bring inquiry into our classroom.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure. And I hope to see some of you encourage your kids to apply for the award next year, because we'd love to see some more from that.
And we have about 5 minutes. I don't know if anyone wants to stick around and ask questions.
Sure.
Or we can
Come on up if you have any questions, and like I said, there's a handout up here if you'd like it. If you don't want to download, you're very welcome to take one. And if you'd like to play with Anne's first generation Peltier flashlight, you're welcome to. It's right up here.
And if you can just take the iPad, yeah, just put it on the table there, that'd be great.